Okay, we are now live. Good evening, colleagues. Welcome to our 8th session of the webinar series. Today, the 16th of May, 2021, we are tackling the topic item writing. Our presenter today is Mrs. Rita Chengo Tembo, who is a seasoned language teacher, examiner, a team leader in English Paper 2, and an administrator. She holds a Bachelor of Arts with Education and is a master's candidate in literacy and language at the University of Zambia, yet to graduate. Mrs. Tembo has taught English for several years and has been an examiner for quite a number of years as well in English Paper 2. She is a team leader of the same paper and an item writer, as well as a trainer of examiners. She is very passionate about language teaching and assessment. Now, apart from the above roles, she is serving as a head teacher of Masuku Secondary School in Choma District. She's also the head teacher representative for the Language Teachers Association in Choma District of Southern Province. She's also serving as a coordinator for University of Zambia Extension Studies in Choma District. Let's sit and learn from this experienced and passionate woman. As usual, while the speaker is on the floor, we'll ask everyone to mute their microphones so that we only hear the presenter. Afterwards, we'll be given an opportunity to ask questions and make contributions. For now, we'll give the floor to Mrs. Tembo to take us through. I am your host, George Kanyama. Please stay tuned. Mrs. Tembo, this is your time.
Thank you so much, host. Good evening, everyone. Today, our sharing is on item writing. As we have heard, the presenter is Tembo Rita Chengo. There we are. We start looking at item writing, what it is. Item writing is the preparation of items for assessment. In doing so, teachers should ensure that they write quality items. And what most teachers refer to as they prepare items, they say item setting. It is not actually item setting, but item writing. Therefore, as teachers, we need to come up with quality items for examinations. Previously, we had a presentation on assessment. I just want to allude to the importance of assessment in education, just to add on what we had previously. Student assessment in any form is a necessary component of effective instruction. When we look at assessments, assessment should be manageable and used as a guide for instruction and curriculum decisions. Also, it should provide data used to measure student performance and the effectiveness of instructional delivery. Currently, experts agree that if standards-based education is to be effective, both daily formal and informal assessment, standardized tests must correlate with the standards. One may pose a question to say, who uses assessment results and for what? We see that teachers, students, administrators, parents, educational specialists such as counselors, therapists, and the like, universities, colleges, and other institutions of higher learning and employees use these assessment results. And for what reason? You find that each category of these people uses assessment results for various reasons. We start with teachers. Teachers use assessments to determine who is and is not academically qualified to begin instruction. They also use it to determine how to best help students who are having difficulties. Apart from that, they also use it to determine who has and has not met minimal standards as specified in the course or unit objectives, the relative effectiveness of specific instructional procedures and materials. Students, as it was mentioned, also use assessment results to determine how well they are meeting the course objectives as specified in the course syllabus. They also use it to determine how well they are doing in relation to their peers. They have results at hand from assessments, they compare with their peers. Also, students use assessment results to determine what performance areas, if any, they need to strengthen. Administrators are also not left aside. They use these results to determine the extent to which individual teachers meet whatever criteria are specified on the teacher evaluation form being used to assess them. They also use these results to determine the extent to which the students as a whole are meeting state and national standards. And they also use them to determine areas of weakness, if any, so that they can be strengthened in those areas. Not leaving parents aside, parents use assessment results to determine how well their son or daughter is meeting the objectives as specified in the course syllabus. If we are to remember very well, we are all encouraged to avail these our learners with the syllabus, hence reaching the parents. Parents also use these results to determine how well their son or daughter is doing in relation to their peers. As they get results, the learners are able to compare with their neighbors, and the parents also see such. Also, to determine what performance areas, if any, their son or daughter needs to strengthen. And in the minds of some parents, how well teachers are teaching. For education specialists, we have groups like special education and reading teachers, speech therapists, and counselors, who also use these results to determine the help they can render to the students and teachers. Also, the extent to which these people can help, that is the education specialists, is dependent upon the accuracy received or generated from the assessment results. Universities, colleges, and other institutions of higher learning also use these assessment results to determine which applicants are most likely to complete their studies in a timely fashion, become successful graduates, and reflect well on the school. Our employers also need these assessment results to determine the extent to which prospective employees have prerequisite skills needed by the employer. And then we look at how to come up with a good item. Since our topic is on item writing, how do we come up with a good item? What does it take to set a good examination paper? That is the first question we ask ourselves. In order for us to come up with this good item, we should ask ourselves the question, what does it take to set a good examination paper? To begin with, we should bear in mind that a test item is not a trap. Therefore, a test is not intended to waylay students, neither is it a trap to catch or fix students so that they fail. A test instead is intended to find out what students have learned or achieved in a prescribed course or syllabus. As you are preparing this test, as a teacher, you are also assessing yourself. And then you find that we don't just prepare these tests from the without. There are tools that we use for item writing, and these are as follows. We need to use the teaching syllabus. We need to use the examination syllabus. We need to use recent past question papers. And we also need to use test specifications or grade. What about this teaching syllabus? The teaching syllabus outlines the content to be covered in a subject, whereas the examination syllabus, on the other hand, outlines the rubric or set of directions to be followed when setting the test, such as maximum marks allowed, whether essay type, short answers, multiple choice, and many more. It also guides on total marks allocated to each response or to a question and time allowed for each paper. Recent past papers are intended to guide the writer on the expected quality or standard. They also serve as reference to a writer to guide him or her to avoid repeating questions that had appeared in recent examination paper. Because many times, if things are not properly done, you find even children saying, oh, this question came even in the last exam. But if we are to follow what we are talking about, we would avoid that. And then test specification or grade, on the other hand, is intended to balance the test so that the test covers a broad spectrum of levels of skills and not just one level. How then do we construct a test? A good test requires a knowledgeable and skillful writer. Remember, we were saying item writing. It requires reliability. It also requires validity. It also requires confidentiality. It also requires the test specification or the grade. It will also require the types of test items. Which test items am I going to target here? We look at validity as one of the requirements. A good test should possess validity. The test should measure and predict accurately what it is supposed to measure or predict, and nothing else. If, for example, a test is to measure achievement, it should only do that. The next requirement is reliability. A test cannot be valid unless it is reliable. If a test gives different results when it is administered a second time, then the test is not reliable. The assumption is that a good test should be consistent. It should give consistent results. The results you see today, and when you administer it for the second time, those are the results you should get again. Confidentiality is also a cardinal requirement in constructing a test. An examiner or setter or writer, in fact, as an individual, in addition to training, in order to acquire the necessary skills, should be a person of integrity. This means that a setter should be honest. He or she should be a person who will never divulge to any unauthorized person any examination question paper or information. It requires even greater integrity when one is a teacher, as well as a setter or a writer there, or an examiner. There could be temptation to unwillingly disclose information on examination questions to students. This must be guarded against at all costs. One has to maintain confidentiality. One should have that integrity. Because disclosure of examination information to unauthorized persons is not only a criminal offense, but it also invalidates the examination whose information has been leaked. Examination leakage and malpractice compromise and lower the quality and standard of an examination and the qualifications resulting from thereof. Test specification or grid as a requirement in setting a test or in writing a test. This will help balance the paper so that all levels of skills are covered. So those were the requirements for constructing an item. We look at types of questions. There are basically two types of questions and subjective questions. Objective questions. These are highly structured and limit candidates' response to supplying a word, a number, a symbol, or selecting the answer from among a given number of options. Objective questions can be subdivided into three. One, the one which has two options. This is where only two options or alternatives are given to candidates to choose from. A statement is made and candidates have to tell whether it is right or wrong. Examples are true or false, yes or no. Here a candidate has 50% chances of choosing the correct answer, even by guesswork. The next one is multiple choice. The purpose of the multiple choice item is to measure candidates' ability with regard to a specific content area, what is being tested. A multiple choice item has a stem, which is a question. The responses include a key correct response and three distractors or false. The way the item is framed and the type of response given would determines whether the item is a recall, interpretation, or problem solving. This is when several possible answers are provided. Usually, there are four possible answers given. The candidate is required to choose the correct or best response, and this makes guesswork more difficult. The third type is the matching type. In this case, two lists are provided from which a candidate is expected to choose a pair of words as the best answer. And then we'll discover that whatever comes in place will have advantages and disadvantages. We look at advantages of objective questions. We see that they are easy to mark, they offer consistency in scoring, they allow wide syllabus coverage, they allow quick statistical feedback. The disadvantages of objective questions are they are difficult to set, especially items that measure the skills at the level of thinking and problem solving. They are time consuming because one cannot just wake up and start writing multiple choice questions. They leave room for guesswork. No credit is given for working out a problem except for the answer. Reliability, validity, and diagnostic value are all compromised because only one area is looked at. Now we look at skills measured by objective questions. The objective type of questions is effective in measuring certain skills. For instance, the ability to recall factual knowledge, intellectual skills of higher order, e.g., application of concepts in solving problems, these are measured. And these skills are based on Broms taxonomy, which divides educational skills into 3 domains. These being 1, cognitive skills, which covers intellectual abilities and skills which include ability to recall, apply, and evaluate information. The second one being affective domain, which deals with emotions, personal, social adjustments of learners. The third one being psychomotor skills, dealing with neuromotor coordination or motor skills. According to Bloom, cognitive skills are arranged in order of increasing degree of complexity. When we talk about the degree of complexity, I can give an example of English paper 2, where in the past, when this was not considered, we would start with summary as question 1, but following this, we reverted to starting from simple to the complex, where summary became question number 3, because paper 2 has 3 questions. There are 6 levels. So for item writers, it is important to understand the levels of cognition so that they design good examination items. The following are examples of appropriate instructions used to reflect the different levels of cognition. That is what we have there. I'm sure we can see the levels, the 6 levels, starting from the first one up to the last one, evaluation there. And within objective questions, we also have now the semi-objective questions, which are also divided into 2. We have short answer questions, structured questions, where we are saying short answer questions demand a short answer, or for instance, 1 word, a symbol, a formula, a number. Sometimes a list of words may be provided from which the answer is to be selected. So children have to choose from that list of words. And we are saying, when preparing structured questions, it is important to remember the following. And this is what mostly we forget. Provide sufficient space on the question papers for candidates to write their answers from. Also, the subsection of the question should have direct relevance to the data given. The marking scheme should be prepared at the same time as the questions are being written. Because if you don't, you risk forgetting what you intended to write, the answer you intended to give there. Also, allocation of marks should be indicated at the appropriate stages on the marking scheme. If this question needs half a mark, you indicate. A question can be made more difficult or easier by alternating the wording or the questions and the form of the answer expected. Changing the kind of material given as information in the question. Also, the nature of the task given, i.e., the kind of the nature of the task given. You take, for instance, the skills required or the kind of answer that is needed there. I just briefly wanted to talk about the same objective questions. The other type we talked about was subjective. From objective, I also mentioned subjective. For subjective, we have an example of free response questions. Free response questions may take either of the two forms as follows. We have long-term projects. This is usually done as a requirement in the coursework. It may be in the form of an investigation where the writer asks the candidates to write on what is demanded. Give them a question to write on something that is within what this writer wants them to write. This type of question is usually open-ended. The other type, other than long-term projects, are essays. Essays are also open-ended and can be subdivided into two. We have structured essays and unstructured essays. So on structured essays, we are saying these are the type where a restriction, where there is a restriction in the nature of the response expected. And this restriction can be in the form of the number of words written. A question is given and they ask the candidates to write the number of words, sorry for that. The number of words they expect the candidates or the learners to write. The other one is the number of lines to say, answer this question in this number of lines. The other one is the number of pages covered. Answer this in 2.5 pages. Unstructured essays. This demands for an answer in which there is no restriction given to the candidate. Unstructured essays are good at assessing the following: candidates' command of the language, candidates' power of analyzing issues or data, candidates' ability to discriminate in the choice of the response, and candidates' skill to argue the case out. And also the candidate's skill to compare and contrast. We have the test specification tables. The test specification tables, we talk about the table of specification, which takes into account the general content area that would determine the form, the content, and difficulty of the examination item or questions. This table of specification guarantees the quality checks in the examination. A test specification is a plan or blueprint. Usually, it is in the form of a grid that tabulates different characteristics, such as content, what am I writing about? It should give the assessment objectives, the levels of assessment objectives, number of items under each content. So we are saying a table of specification is one of the documents which guarantee validity, content validity. This means that the table of specification will help us be able to ensure that the examination questions are not too difficult or too easy for the candidates, because it will help us balance those. It also represents the syllabus and the cognitive requirements at that level of education. If we remember the table that we had scrolled, it was indicating the levels of the skills. So when we go to the table, it will show us at this level, at knowledge level, how many questions, what type of questions am I to ask there. In addition, specification tables also take into account variables such as purpose of the examination or test. Why am I testing these children? Am I measuring achievement and the like? The segment of the course covered, the type of test interpretation to be used, the age of the test takers and time allotted, and other practical issues related to an efficient and reliable means of assessing the learner. Some test specification tables may also include some test specification tables may also include the type of item, the type of item, whether it should be objective type or subjective type. You indicate on this table of specification. It may also include sources of item content, description of problem stimuli, characteristics of responses, and correct responses and incorrect responses. Item specifications provide a structure to an item, which can then be used to write many items. In addition, this test specification table should specify the number or proportion of items that are planned to be included in the test for each content area. So when we are talking about the content area, from the table that we scrolled there, I'm sure you still remember, we had the knowledge level, we had the comprehension level, those 6. The proportions should be relative to the to the importance ascribed to each content area, and also to the attainment of the set instructions or goals. So the table I was talking about, the areas are those: knowledge, comprehension, application, analysis. The purpose of such clarification is to act as the purpose. The purpose of such clarification is to act as just a minute. The purpose of such clarification, when we talk about the content area, the levels of objectives, is to act as a tool for examining the balance of the course content. It is also relevant in evaluating the structure of the examination papers. Test specifications may be drawn up for classroom tests as well. And if you start it from the level of the classroom, then it will not even be difficult for you when you go to higher levels. Now, when these items are written, there are issues that we need to consider. We take, for instance, test bias. Bias in testing can be viewed in terms of content and formatting, language, or instructions used in the testing items. Have these balanced? A test is considered to be biased when candidates having the same latent ability show a differential probability of obtaining correct responses. Here are the learners who are at the same intellectual level. You give them this test, you are expecting all of them to get 100%, but this one gets lower marks, the other one passes. So we are saying a test is considered to be biased when candidates having the same latent ability show a differential probability of obtaining correct responses. In other words, we are saying bias is the presence of some characteristics of an item that result in differential performance for individuals of the same ability, but come from different background, such as race, ethnicity, sex, culture, and religious groups. When I talked about the same latent ability, we have these two learners, a white person and an indigenous Zambian. Let's take, for instance, a Tonga. I bring a test on Nkolola. These are girls, but these pupils are of the same latent ability. You definitely, they are the one that is of that culture will get better results than the other. So that indicates test bias. A biased test item measures attributes that are irrelevant to the content being tested. Also, an item can be considered to be biased if it contains language or content that is difficult for different subgroups of candidates or learners. In terms of item structure and format, an item might be biased if there are ambiguities or inadequacies in the STEM. Test instructions or distractors, that is by Rogers and Hambleton, 1995. We have talked about test bias. What are the types of test bias? We look at the types of test bias. One of them is item bias. Bias comes in many forms. It can be sex, it can be cultural, it can be ethnic, religious, or class bias. An item may be biased if it contains language that is differentially familiar to the subgroups of examinees, or if an item structure is differentially difficult for subgroups of examinees. A single test item is also biased if its scores are consistently too high or too low for an individual or a group. And this bias occurs when test scores are consistently inaccurate for an individual or a group. There's something wrong there. Item bias also occurs if some groups of candidates are drawn to certain distractors, such as incorrect responses, a multiple choice, incorrect responses, a multiple choice to a multiple choice item. It is therefore very important that when checking for item bias, the focus is on the responses to individual items rather than the total test. Why didn't children do well in here? Look at the item, and they did well in this item. How many learners did well in this item? And why did this number fail to get the intended results? Meaning there's some biasness there in terms of items. And an item may be language biased if it uses terms that are not commonly used countrywide, or if it uses terms that have different connotations in different parts of the country. An example of language bias can be given in our Zambian languages. In Chitonga, when you say kusondoka, this means getting mad. While in Chinyanja, kusondoka means going downhill. Imagine you had used that item in your test. Then there's biasness. Another example of language bias is the use of unfamiliar and difficult words. Instead of shocked, you use flabbergasted, instead of just using articles. The use of elite words also is another example of item bias, e.g. poach or partial instead of simply using veranda, which learners are used to. So those were examples of item bias. The second kind of bias is content bias. Content bias is introduced in a test. There is the disproportionate representation of males and females in test items. This may be through stereotyping roles that the females and males are portrayed to play in the test item. An example of content bias against girls would be one in which students are asked to compare the weights of several objects, including a football. These girls are less likely to have handled a football. They might find the item more difficult than the boys, even though they have mastered the concept measured by the item. We have looked at biasness in construction of tests or items. What then is fairness in test construction? The term fairness has different perspectives, and this is open to various meanings. No single meaning is adequate to capture the different notions of test fairness. However, in testing, fairness is defined based on various viewpoints. Test fairness is viewed in terms of comparable exposure of candidates to opportunity to learn the subject content from which the test items were developed. Let them learn. This means the candidates who take a particular test should have been exposed to the same curriculum or syllabus. Equal testing conditions and administration, for instance, access to learning materials, conducive and convenient venues for candidates, including those with disabilities. A fair test is one that is comparably valid for all candidates and that which affords the test takers an opportunity to demonstrate the acquired skill, the acquired knowledge and skills which are relevant to the purpose of the designed test. And this would only happen if all the learners were exposed to the same learning courses and environment. Item writers, experts in measurement and examining bodies in particular, must ensure that they design testing instruments, that is tests, that provide valid and reliable measures of performance of the candidates. And in addition, since the issue of fairness is fundamental in all aspects of testing measurement, professionals must use tests that are fair to all categories of candidates, regardless of their sex, ethnicity, age, and other personal characteristics. However, there are also some suggested ways to avoid bias in item writing. So we are saying these item writers should come from different backgrounds. The next thing is that selecting materials that reflect the varied interests of candidates from a wide range of cultural backgrounds and experiences so that they all move at the same page. Checking the items for possible content bias at the stage of development to ensure that items do not favor a particular group. It can be a class item. When we say development, we are looking at the stage before this test is administered. Also, other factors that may cause the candidates to cause low scores may not necessarily be due to test bias, but could be from other factors like test anxiety or poor handwriting. So all those should be looked into. Looking at the complexity of item writing, I feel it is imperative that we also look at some guiding principles in test construction. We are saying there is need to define clearly the purpose for testing, the content, and the skills tested. Also, providing item writers with clear guidelines on the characteristics of the examinees, the content, and the content coverage, and other information that will ensure fairness throughout the test development. So this can happen even at classroom level. Maybe someone was not teaching this class. It is important that clear guidelines are given to the one that is writing the item, and also the content coverage, how far you've gone, and other information that will ensure fairness throughout the test development process. Also, selecting and using the most appropriate test instrument based on your knowledge of content, skills, and the intended examinees. There is need to review the test to ensure that the test items are appropriate for the content and the skills intended to be assessed. Many are times that we as teachers do not do that. I just finished preparing my item, I have to administer it. We are being reminded here that we have to review such tests, ensure that the linguistic demands of the items are appropriate for the level of the learners. The other thing is that we have to avoid demeaning or offensive material, i.e. an item, for instance, an item that would imply the inferiority of a certain group. For example, when you want to say housewife, instead, I think the best one would be house engineer or house manager, and one would feel happy if such words are used. Avoid controversial, inflammatory, and upsetting materials to members of one's sex, ethnic group, culture, and others. For example, you say witchcraft, torture, genocide, appetite, abortion, and many more. Also avoid depicting members of certain groups as having stereotypical occupations. For example, it is not good to say Bembas are thieves. Also avoid complex vocabulary, e.g. saponia, regatta. Just use simple words that people who understand, that people always use. Ensure that the items are content, gender, and culturally appropriate. Provide examinees with clear guidelines and procedures for taking the test well in advance for the test administration. Also provide conducive test environment for all groups of the examinees. Guidelines like marking schemes or marking keys for scoring the test. Must be provided and strictly adhered to so that there is no biasness in terms of allocating marks. Also, in order to ensure objectivity, markers or examiners must be trained to use the marking key or marking scheme almost the same way to ensure that content irrelevant factors do not influence their marking. So they will just be using that marking scheme or marking key. And finally, having gone this far, I'll conclude by saying, considering the important roles that examinations play in the lives of individuals, it is important that item writers take into account the gender, cultural, and other issues that may affect individuals on a test item or the whole test. There's also a need to break all forms of barriers that may hinder the good performance of both boys and girls. It is important, therefore, that the items coined for examinations do not disadvantage any one particular group. Also, item writers should make sure the language used in test construction is that which is acceptable. There is also a need to ensure the content is good and relevant for all categories of test takers. The coined items should not contain any bias or sensitive material. Items should be phrased in the best way possible, ensuring that there are no ambiguities. Issues of item bias and fairness in test construction are very, very important. Thank you for listening.
Thank you, Mrs. Tembo, for the wonderful presentation. At this point, we invite questions and comments from members of the audience. Anyone who has a question or a comment to make, please use the raise your hand option. If you are not sure of that function, Just unmute yourself and begin speaking.
Yes, George.
Yes, Chief.
I think it's a very good presentation. I was in a meeting, but I followed every step. However, I think I would want to just caution the participants that anyone who wants to come up with a very good item should ensure they understand Bloom's taxonomy, because that's the pinnacle of all the item writing and setting. Yeah, I thought I should mention that.
Thank you. Anyone else with a comment or question? Doc, you can unmute yourself.
Thank you, the moderator. My contribution, should I first say the presentation flowed very well. But now I wanted to ask on the test specifications and test, what is that? What is the value of that type of language in the setting of tests? Test specification table, what I heard there, but understanding was limited. Thank you.
Over to me.
Yes, please.
Okay. For the test specification table, I think that is where even the issue of Bloom's taxonomy came on board. That is our guiding principle when we are writing an item. That table has content areas. So on that table, if you go to the table, we have the content. Where we have the content, we'll write a question. If, say, it is comprehension, where are we going? Under which content area are we going to, under which content area are we going to ask questions? Like we have the knowledge skill, the level of skill, we have comprehension there, we have application, we have analysis, we have synthesis, we have evaluation. Comprehension has 10 questions. How many questions are asked from the knowledge level? The content will be comprehension. And then the level of assessment objective, that is where we have those skills. Which skill are we testing? Under which skill? Under the knowledge skill. Do we test any question? Do we have any questions for under comprehension? How many questions do we have under knowledge skill? We indicate below there. Comprehension. How many questions do we have from comprehension? And then at the end there, we'll put the total and the max. We'll put the total max. I've given the example of comprehension because we are very familiar with it. It has 20 marks. So there are skills that are, what we need to understand there are the skills that are tested for that particular content. If it is comprehension, which skills do we test? This item writer should know the skills that are being tested and how many questions should fall under each skill. So it is very important that we have this specification tables in our department, languages department. Do you have one, Doc? Hello?
Okay. All right, thank you for the response. I think Doc is muted. Anyone else with a question or a contribution?
I think it's clear, the host. Are you there?
Okay, yes.
Yeah, I think it's clear. So
All right. Okay.
if it were possible, we needed more information and a practical one next time on such a presentation, so that we don't set questions of the same footing, left foot without the right one. Already what I've seen is I've disqualified some paper just here as the show is going through. It's like the questions are coming from the same area of cognitive remembering. Okay. So with that type of presentation, I feel if it were possible, as we move, we go now deeper into practical aspect of setting that test. If it is structure, we see. If it is the comprehension, we see. If it is the summary, we see. Following that type of a lecture. Thank you.
Okay. I wanted to add something. I don't know if you have this table of specification.
Where is it found? What does it look like, madam?
I have one. I'll WhatsApp it tomorrow.
Thank you. Thank you so much, madam.
Because that one guides how many questions you ask under this level for comprehension, how many you ask under this one, and then the total. Structure the same, summary the same.
Oh, that would be very
and
great.
Then to give you, and even paper one they have.
Thank you so much for the guide, Madam Rita.
Okay. There being no further comments or questions. Oh, that was background noise. Okay, so there being no questions or further comments, I would like to thank you, colleagues, for having joined us today. Our first series ends today, but we'll begin a new series next week, and our first presentation, all things being equal, will be based on teaching and assessing summary. So be on the lookout. We'll send the invites as soon as we have put everything in place. Thank you for being with us throughout these 8 weeks, and I hope you will not tire and continue joining these series for your own benefit and ultimately the benefit of the learner. We'll continue providing these services to all those that want to better their teaching and their practice. We thank you for today. A good night. God bless you and have a blessed and productive week ahead.
Thank you. We are great to host.
All right, so we can exit. I'm not going to end the meeting. We can exit.